の先がお前たちの時代だ。気引き締めていけ。
おう、じゃあな。
What's up, everybody? I've got a little bit of a bonus gameplay video for you guys, as this is going to be the last gameplay video I'm going to be making of the OP08 format, and this is me rocking Marco. This is actually from a week or 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I decided to take a Marco list for a spin. And I didn't do too hot with it. Marco unfortunately had some pretty bad matchups. Ran into a Reiju, unfortunately lost to a Reiju, ran into some other aggro decks, and didn't end up doing too hot. But this was a pretty interesting match here, going up against a Nami. And I usually think, you know, a deck like this that's not very aggressive, not going to have the best matchup into Nami, but this, my friends, is going to be a masterclass on how to fight against Nami, because I don't know, I feel like I've gotten pretty decent at it. First, we're playing Marco. All those cards in our life are useless at this point, and we're gonna go and swing 8k into Nami. Nami has one Dawn up, which usually represents either a 2k event or a potential Gum Gum Gavel. That's the only event that they can counter out of with plus 4k on for one Dawn. So a pretty safe 8k hit into one Dawn. And then we've got a good old blocker here, and we're kind of in this situation where my opponent has 2 cards in the field, especially one of them is Kaya, and one thing you need to think about when you're playing against Nami is they run Snake Dance, which is an event that counters for 4k and then puts 2 cards, or puts a card from their play and back into their hands. So they can pick their Kaya back up, which means they can play their Kaya out again, drawing 2, trashing 2. We're going to just swing now. Because my opponent only had one Dawn open, I'm pretty safe to ignore a white snake here. And so we can just keep pushing some damage into my opponent. Opponent's just going to give me 2 cards out of counter for hand, and then we're going to play out an Ivankov. Ivankov, pretty neat little tech for this deck. It's a pretty good early game, and then allows you to just draw cards, because if you get 6 or less cards in hand, you get to draw a card every single time. My opponent playing pretty perfectly into letting me go for a pretty solid Gravity Blade here on my 7 Dawn turn. I'm just going to try to make sure my opponent gets as little value out of their blockers as possible. And the fact that my opponent gave me cards from hand instead of a blocker last turn was pretty nice for me, because the smaller Nami's hand gets, the easier it is for me to attack into. So we're just going to tap 7 here. We're going to Gravity Blade. We're going to target those 2 here. And now we kind of run into the situation where I could attack, but it's never worth swinging in 5Ks. Especially with Dawn open, especially with a Kaya on board. That's just an easy white snake, put the Kaya back in the hand. And so I always try to avoid putting Kayas back in the hands. So always trying to play things out to either KO the Kayas, and now I've found a few plays here. We can play the Rayleigh out to KO the Kaya, but instead it's probably a little bit better to play out the Whitebeard here. That Whitebeard is a multi-purpose. Whitebeard is going to allow me to KO incidental either blockers or Kayas to prevent my opponent from white snaking them back to hand. But also later in the game, he serves as a good beater, being an 8k body. Typically, you want to swing 9ks or plus into Nami, just because it's pretty often that they're going to have 4k counters in hand. So just going to activate that Whitebeard to take out the Kaya before I think about potentially attacking, but it's not worth it for me to swing with the Bond Clay here, or with the Ivankov. So instead we're just going to pressure an 8 here. My opponent decides to Gum Gum Gavel. Because I got rid of the Kaya, the White Snake was not going to be a valuable play. Yes, it still gets a card out of their hand, but they don't get the value of putting something back into their hand. Nami's now up to the good old 10 Dawn. And Nami's going to do what Nami does best and just pass back to me. If I at some point swing with the Ivankov, that's a pretty easy swing in with Nami. But if in this specific matchup, Nami never attacks typically, so your hand's gonna have a lot of 2Ks in it. We also do have a pudding, so we've kind of found 2 of the best cards in the matchup. One being the Gravity Blade to get rid of some of those annoying blockers, but we also have the pudding here. We're going to slam that pudding down. I think at the time Nami had 6 cards in hand, which I'm completely happy with. That's -1 back into Nami's deck, as they are going to draw out 5 new cards. Possibly Nami had built up a little bit of a good hand, so to completely randomize my opponent's hand to keep them on their toes is pretty nice, because if they end up drawing some blockers, some non-counter I'm pretty happy to see that, which means some of my attacks are going to go in. That Nuke is standing pretty. We're going to just swing a nice little 10k. The reason I swing 10k here is if they end up having White Snake, which is a card that gives Nami plus 1000 for the turn, that would allow them to counter out of a 9k attack with a 4k counter. But swinging 10k makes them still have to spend additional resources. I'm going to swing a 9k. My opponent decides to counter out of that using both a Love Love Mellow and a card from hand. We're going to activate Marco's ability, just going to continue to look for ways to pressure. And opponent shows me another great card that Newgate's going to be able to clean up. Newgate doing double duty here as being both a good attacker on the turns I can attack, and then the turn being a good KO master for the turns I don't need to. So we're letting ourselves into a pretty decent play here. We're on our 10 Dawn turn. We could go into a Sanji, into either a Rayleigh or a Whitebeard. Rayleigh notably has the same attack power as the Whitebeard, so it doesn't really matter. Rayleigh can come down and KO the Kaya, so can the Newgate. So it doesn't really matter what I decide to do here. I could use that one extra. Let's see here. I almost put that 2k on top. I see. I almost do it again. Yeah, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going Sanji this turn. That's one of the hardest play patterns to like remember. Is like, oh yeah, this is my Sanji turn. The card I put on top is the card I need to put into play. So we're gonna put the Rayleigh into play. Rayleigh's gonna take out the Kaya, basically shutting my opponent off from being able to White Snake again. And I'm sitting in this situation where I only have an 8k and a 6k to swing. There's no reason for me to swing at this point, and just kind of keep forcing my Nami to do something, right? And Nami plays out another Kaya, which is just going to get eaten by another one of my characters, likely going to be a Newgate here. I could play Newgate out and then be able to attach enough Dawn to swing at least 3 9k attacks, potentially. So we pick up another Newgate for turn. We're going to play out the Newgate, get rid of the Ivankov. That Newgate's going to immediately activate to take out the Kaya. That is 3 Kayas down. 3 Kayas that never got White Snaked back into hand, or not, Snake Danced back into hand. And now what we could do here is we could go 9. So we're going to just do a poke with 9, right? So 9 requires 2 cards from hand, which is going to require at least a 2 cost counter plus another 1 cost counter. Opponent does show me the White Snake. So showing me the White Snake here pretty much means that I need to start swinging 10Ks, right? Because Nami's at 6K, any of their 4K counters, which is a majority of their deck, are going to allow them to counter out of things pretty easily. So it's better to just use this 2 Dawn to, let's see here. I guess we're just still going to force my opponent to use a 2 cost counter. My opponent's hand's getting kind of small here, so I am pressuring them a little bit. Opponent's going to play out a 2K counter, taking themselves up to 8k, and then they're gonna have to play something else to get out of the attack here. Opponent is at 3 life. Opponent's gonna play out a 2k counter to get out of that attack, and now we can swing 10k pretty safely, and my opponent's gonna take that. Opponent does hit a trigger, allowing him to trash 1 and draw 1, and then we're gonna pass back to my opponent. So we're kind of in the situation where I've got 4 big bodies on board. My opponent has not been able to put a Kai into hand. Any card that they play out, I'm just gonna get rid of, whether it's my Gravity Blades, which Gravity Blade is pretty crazy, because at the time that I Gravity Bladed those 2 blockers to the bottom of the deck, right, there were 2 bricks on the bottom of his deck. Then he shuffled after the pudding, so those kind of flew back into his deck here, but this will allow me to just put 2 more things on the bottom of their deck, increasing their deck size by 2. So Gravity Blade becoming incredibly clutch in this matchup. I actually only run 2 copies in this specific version of the deck, but honestly, kind of just doing the things we want to see best. We ended up seeing a second Sanji too, which at this point, it's a little too flashy to play out a second Sanji. It's better just to Gravity Blade these away. And my opponent could have, I believe, chosen the order that they went under, but my opponent just, I think, maybe out of a slight frustration, just puts them on the bottom. And then we're going to just swing 9k. Very safe play. Opponent does hit a Sanji's Pilaf. My opponent is at 7 Dawn? No, 6 Dawn because of the play last turn, so that's at least 3 4k counters. So we're gonna do 9. Opponent plays another White Snake, which means now he can counter out of 9k swings with just those 4k counters going forward. But my opponent just taps 1 and plays out another 2k, which takes him up to 8, which then he's gonna do a very similar play to the turn before and play a 2k. Now I'm gonna be swinging, I think that was a 9k there. because I just don't have enough Dawn to swing higher. So just a 9k again, and my opponent's going to take it. First one he gives me counter 4, the second one he just takes it. My opponent has like 3 cards in hand now, and at least 14 cards in deck at this point. So pretty hard for him to get out of it here. My opponent does have another peel-off, which is going to let him draw 2 cards, take himself up to 4 cards in hand. And then it looks like he's going to be doing a little bit more tapping here. He's going to play another peel-off. Looks like all the peel-offs were hiding at the bottom of his deck. If my opponent had a lot less cards in hand in deck at the time, he could have definitely done more work here. But my opponent basically concedes the game here by using almost all of his Dawn, leaving 1 Dawn open and a blocker when I have just so much stuff on board. Yeah, I can just tap one of my Newgates, immediately take the blocker out. That's why I think Newgate is just like super strong in this matchup specifically, which, I mean, it's strong in any matchup with board presence, but the fact that I can just keep hosing this is pretty crazy. So we're just going to swing 11k here. I could have attached all. There's no reason for me not to attach all at this point, but you can see my plays of just constantly hosing the Kayas. He had 2 white snakes in hand, and those white snakes, they were never worth playing at that point because he just had better 4k counters. And that's the Nami matchup. If you like this type of content, definitely subscribe, and the next time you see me, we're going to be talking about 09 and maybe open in a box again. Who knows? Thanks, everybody.